Hello, and welcome to Bookspot. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of Have Spacesuit Will Travel by Robert Heinlein. Our protagonist and narrator Kip, along with his companion Pee-wee, have been whisked from Pluto to Vega to the Magellanic Clouds, where they are being hosted, imprisoned, kept. They housed us in that enormous building in a part you could call a transience hotel, although detention barracks, or jail, is closer. I can't complain about accommodations, but I was getting confoundedly tired of being locked up every time I arrived in a new place. A robot met us and took us down inside. There are robots wherever you turn on Lanador. I don't mean things that look like the Tin Woodman. I mean machines that do things for you, such as this one, which led us to our rooms, then hung around like a bellhop expecting a tip. It was a three-wheeled cart with a big basket on top for luggage if we had any. It met us, whistled to the mother thing in Vegan, and led us away down a lift and through a wide and endlessly long corridor. I was given my room again, a fake of a fake, with all the errors left in and new ones added. The sight of it was not reassuring. It shrieked that they planned to keep us there as long as they chose. But the room was complete, even to a rack for Oscar and a bathroom outside. Just beyond my room was a fake of another kind, a copy of that Arabian Nights horror Pee-wee had occupied on Vega 5. Pee-wee seemed delighted, so I didn't point out the implications. The mother thing hovered around while we got out of our spacesuits. "Do you think you will be comfortable?" "Oh, sure," I agreed unenthusiastically. "If you want food or anything, just say so. It will come." "So, is there a telephone somewhere?" "Simply speak your wishes. You will be heard." I didn't doubt her, but I was almost as tired of rooms that were bugged as of being locked up. A person ought to have privacy. "I'm hungry now," Pee-wee commented. "I had an early breakfast." We were in her room. A purple drapery drew back, a light glowed in the wall. In about 2 minutes, a section of wall disappeared. A slab at table height stuck out like a tongue. On it were dishes and silverware, cold cuts, fruit, bread, butter, and a mug of steaming cocoa. Pee-wee clapped and squealed. I looked at it with less enthusiasm. "You see," the mother thing went on with a smile in her voice, "ask for what you need. If you need me, I'll come. But I must go now." "Oh, please don't go, mother thing." "I must, Pee-wee dear, but I will see you soon. By the by, there are 2 more of your people here." "Huh?" I put in. "Who? Where?" "Next door." She was gone with gliding swiftness. The bellhop speeded up to stay ahead of her. I spun around. "Did you hear that?" "I certainly did." "Well, you eat if you want to. I'm going to look for those other humans." "Hey, wait for me." "I thought you wanted to eat." "Well," Pee-wee looked at the food. "Just a sec." She hastily buttered 2 slices of bread and handed one to me. I was not in that much of a hurry. I ate it. Pee-wee gobbled hers, took a gulp from the mug, and offered it to me. "Want some?" It wasn't quite cocoa. There was a meaty flavor, too. But it was good. I handed it back, and she finished it. "Now I can fight wildcats. Let's go, Kip." Next door was through the foyer of our 3-room suite and 15 yards down the corridor, where we came to a door arch. I kept Pee-wee back and glanced in cautiously. It was a diorama, a fake scene. This one was better than you see in museums. I was looking through a bush at a small clearing in wild country. It ended in a limestone bank. I could see overcast sky and a cave mouth in the rocks. The ground was wet, as if from rain. A caveman hunkered down close to the cave. He was gnawing the carcass of a small animal, possibly a squirrel. Pee-wee tried to shove past me. I stopped her. The caveman did not appear to notice us, which struck me as a good idea. His legs looked short, but I think he weighed twice what I do, and he was muscled like a weightlifter, with short, hairy forearms and knotty biceps and calves. His head was huge, bigger than mine, and longer, but his forehead and chin weren't much. His teeth were large and yellow, and a front one was broken. I heard bones crunching. In a museum, I would have expected a card reading Neanderthal man circa last ice age, but wax dummies of extinct breeds don't crack bones. Pee-wee protested, "Hey, let me look." He heard. Pee-wee stared at him. He stared toward us. Pee-wee squealed. He whirled and ran into the cave, waddling but making time. I grabbed Pee-wee. "Let's get out of here." "Wait a minute," she said calmly. "He won't come out in a hurry." She tried to push the bush aside. "Pee-wee!" "Try this," she suggested. Her hand was shoving air. "They've got him penned." I tried it. Something transparent blocked the arch. I could push it a little, but not more than an inch. "Plastic?" I suggested. "Like lucite, but springier?" Said Pee-wee. "More like the helmet of my suit. Tougher, though, and I'll bet light passes only one way. I don't think he saw us." "Okay, let's go back to our rooms. Maybe we can lock them." She went on feeling that barrier. "Pee-wee," I said sharply, "you're not listening." "What were you doing talking," she asked reasonably, "when I wasn't listening?" "Pee-wee, this is no time to be difficult." "You sound like Daddy. He dropped that rat he was eating. He might come back. If he does, you won't be here because I'm about to drag you, and if you bite, I'll bite back. I warn you." She looked around with a trace of animosity. "I wouldn't bite you, Kip, no matter what you did. But if you're going to be stuffy, oh, well, I doubt he'll come out for an hour or so. We'll come back." "Okay." I pulled her away. But we did not leave. I heard a loud whistle and a shout. "Hey, Buster, over here!" The words were not English, but I understood well enough. The yell came from an archway across the corridor and a little farther on. I hesitated, then moved toward it because Pee-wee did so. A man about 45 was loafing in this doorway. He was no Neanderthal. He was civilized, or somewhat so. He wore a long, heavy woolen tunic belted at the waist, forming a sort of kilt. His legs below that were wrapped in wool, and he was shod in heavy, short boots, much worn. At the belt and supported by a shoulder sling was a short, heavy sword. There was a dagger on the other side of the belt. His hair was short, and he was clean-shaven, save for a few days' gray stubble. His expression was neither friendly nor unfriendly. It was sharply watchful. "Thanks," he said gruffly. "Are you the jailer?" Pee-wee gasped. "Why, that's Latin!" "What can you do when you meet a legionary, right after a caveman?" I answered, "No, I'm a prisoner myself." I said it in Spanish and repeated it in pretty fair classical Latin. I used Spanish because Pee-wee hadn't been quite correct. It was not Latin he spoke, not the Latin of Ovid and Gaius Julius Caesar, nor was it Spanish. It was in between, with an atrocious accent and other differences, but I could worry out the meaning. He sucked his lip and answered, "That's bad. I've been trying for 3 days to attract attention, and all I get is another prisoner. But that's how the die rolls. Say, that's a funny accent you have." "Sorry, amigo, but I have trouble understanding you too," I repeated in Latin, then split the difference. I added in improvised lingua franca, "Speak slowly, will you?" "I'll speak as I please, and don't call me amico. I'm a Roman citizen, so don't get gay." That's a free translation. His advice was more vulgar, I think. It was close to a Spanish phrase, which is certainly vulgar. "What's he saying?" demanded Pee-wee. "It is Latin, isn't it? Translate." I was glad she hadn't caught it. "Why, Pee-wee, don't you know the language of poetry and science? Oh, don't be a smarty. Tell me." "Don't crowd me, hon. I'll tell you later. I'm having trouble following it." "What's that barbarian grunting?" the Roman said pleasantly. "Talk language, boy, or will you have 10 with the flat of the sword?" He seemed to be leaning on nothing, so I felt the air. It was solid. I decided not to worry about his threat. "I'm talking as best I can. We spoke to each other in our own language. Pig grunts. Talk Latin, if you can." He looked at Pee-wee as if just noticing her. "Your daughter? Want to sell her? If she had meat on her bones, she might be worth half a denario." Pee-wee clouded up. "I understood that," she said fiercely. "Come out here and fight." "Try it in Latin," I had advised her. "If he understands you, he'll probably spank you." She looked uneasy. "You wouldn't let him?" "You know I wouldn't." "Let's go back. That's what I said earlier." I escorted her past the caveman's lair to our suite. Pee-wee, I'm going back and see what our noble Roman has to say. Do you mind? I certainly do. Be reasonable, hun. If we could be hurt by them, the mother thing would know it. After all, she told us they were here. I'll go with you. What for? I'll tell you everything I learn. This may be a chance to find out what this silliness means. What's he doing here? Have they kept him in deep freeze a couple of 1,000 years? How long has he been awake? What does he know that we don't? We're in a bad spot. All the data I can dig up we need. You can help by keeping out. If you're scared, send for the mother thing. She pouted. I'm not scared. All right, if that's the way you want it. I do. Eat your dinner. Jojo the dog-faced boy was not in sight. I gave his door a wide berth. If a ship can go anywhere in no time, could it skip a dimension and go anywhere to any time? How would the math work out? The soldier was still lounging at his door. He looked up. Didn't you hear me say to stick around? I heard you, I admitted, but we're not going to get anywhere if you take that attitude. I'm not one of your privates. Lucky for you. Do we talk peacefully, or do I leave? He looked me over. Peace, but don't get smart with me, barbarian. He called himself Unio. He had served in Spain and Gaul, then transferred to the 6th Legion, the Victrix, which he felt that even a barbarian should know of. His legion's garrison was Eboracum, north of Londinium, in Britain, but he had been on advance duty as a brevet centurion. He pronounced it centurio. His permanent rank was about like top sergeant. He was smaller than I am, but I would not want to meet him in an alley, nor in the palisades of the Castra. He had a low opinion of Britons and all barbarians, including me. Nothing personal, some of my best friends are barbarians. Women, the British climate, high brass, and priests. He thought well of Caesar, Rome, the gods, and his own professional ability. The army wasn't what it used to be, and the slump came from treating auxiliaries like Roman citizens. He had been guarding the building of a wall to hold back barbarians, a nasty lot who would sneak up and slit your throat and eat you, which no doubt had happened to him since he was now in the nether regions. I thought he was talking about Hadrian's Wall, but it was 3 days' march north of there, where the seas were closest together. The climate there was terrible, and the natives were bloodthirsty beasts who dyed their bodies and didn't appreciate civilization. You'd think the eagles were trying to steal their dinky island. Provincial, like me, no offense meant. Nevertheless, he had bought a little barbarian to wife and had been looking forward to garrison duty at Eboracum when this happened. Unio shrugged. Perhaps if I'd been careful with lustrations and sacrifices, my luck wouldn't have run out. But I figure that if a man does his duty and keeps himself and his weapon clean, the rest is the CO's worry. Careful of that doorway, it's witched. The longer he talked, the easier it was to understand him. The U.S. endings turned to O, and his vocabulary was not that of DeBello Gallico. Horse wasn't equus, it was cabalo. His idioms bothered me, plus the fact that his Latin was diluted by a dozen barbarian tongues, but you can blank out every third word in a newspaper and still catch the gist. I learned a lot about the daily life and petty politics of the Victrix, and nothing that I wanted to know. Unio did not know how he had gotten where he was, nor why, except that he was dead and awaiting disposition in a receiving barracks somewhere in the netherworld, a theory which I was not yet prepared to accept. He knew the year of his death, year 8 of the Emperor and 899 of Rome. I wrote out the dates in Roman numerals to make sure, but I did not remember when Rome was founded, nor could I identify the Caesar even by his full name. There have been so many Caesars. But Hadrian's Wall had been built and Britain was still occupied. That placed Unio close to the 3rd century. He wasn't interested in the caveman across the way. It embodied to him the worst vice of a barbarian, cowardice. I didn't argue, but I would be timid too if I had saber-toothed tigers yowling at my door. Did they have saber-toothed tigers back then? Make it cave bears. Unio went back and returned with hard dark bread, cheese, and a cup. He did not offer me any, and I don't think it was the barrier. He poured a little of his drink on the floor and started to chomp. It was a mud floor, the walls were rough stone, and the ceiling was supported by wooden beams. It may have been a copy of dwellings during the occupation of Britain, but I'm no expert. I didn't stay much longer. Not only did bread and cheese remind me that I was hungry, but I offended Unio. I don't know what set him off, but he discussed me with cold thoroughness, my eating habits, ancestry, appearance, conduct, and method of earning a living. Unio was pleasant as long as you agreed with him, ignored insults, and deferred to him. Many older people demand this, even in buying a 39-cent can of talcum. You learn to give it without thinking. Otherwise, you get a reputation as a fresh kid and potential juvenile delinquent. The less respect an older person deserves, the more certain he is to demand it from anyone younger. So I left, as Unio didn't know anything helpful anyhow. As I went back, I saw the caveman peering out of his cave. I said, "Take it easy, Jojo," and went on. I bumped into another invisible barrier blocking our archway. I felt it, then said quietly, "I want to go in." The barrier melted away, and I walked in, then found it was back in place. My rubber soles made no noise, and I didn't call out because Pee-wee might be asleep. Her door was open, and I peeped in. She was sitting tailor fashion on that incredible oriental divan, rocking Madame Pompadour and crying. I backed away, then returned whistling, making a racket and calling to her. She popped out of her door with a smiling face and no trace of tears. "Hi, Kip. It took you long enough." "The guy talks too much. What's new?" "Nothing. I ate and you didn't come back, so I took a nap. You woke me. What did you find out?" "Let me order dinner and I'll tell you while I eat." I was chasing the last bit of gravy when a bellhop robot came for us. It was like the other one, except that it had in glowing gold on its front that triangle with 3 spirals. "Follow me," it said in English. I looked at Pee-wee. "Didn't Mother Things say she was coming back?" "Why, I thought so." The machine repeated, "Follow me. Your presence is required." I laid my ears back. I have taken lots of orders, some of which I shouldn't have, but I have yet never taken orders from a piece of machinery. "Go climb a rope," I said. "You'll have to drag me." This is not what to say to a robot. It did. Pee-wee yelled, "Mother Thing, where are you? Help us!" Her bird song came out of the machine. "It's all right, dears. The servant will lead you to me." I quit struggling and started to walk. That refugee from an appliance dealer took us into another lift, then into a corridor whose walls whizzed past as soon as we entered. It nudged us through an enormous archway topped by the triangle and spirals and herded us into a pen near one wall. The pen was not apparent until we moved, more of that annoying solid air. It was the biggest room I have ever been in. Triangular, unbroken by post or pillar, with ceiling so high and walls so distant I half expected local thunderstorms. An enormous room makes me feel like an ant. I was glad to be near a wall. The room was not empty, hundreds in it, but it looked empty because they were all near the walls. The giant floor was bare. But there were 3 worm faces out in the center. Worm Face's trial was in progress. I don't know if our own worm face was there. I would not have known even if they had not been a long way off, as the difference between 2 worm faces is the difference between having your throat cut and being beheaded. But as we learned, the presence or absence of the individual offender was the least important part of the trial. Wormface was being tried, present or not, alive or dead. The Mother Thing was speaking. I could see her tiny figure, also far out on the floor, but apart from the worm faces. Her bird-song voice reached me faintly, but I heard her words clearly in English. From somewhere near us, her translated words were piped in. The feel of her was in the English translation, just as it was in her bird tones. She was telling what she knew of Wormface conduct as dispassionately as if describing something under a microscope, like a traffic officer testifying, "At 9:17 on the 5th while on duty at," etc., the facts. The Mother Thing was finishing her account of events on Pluto. She chopped it off at the point of explosion. Another voice spoke in English. It was flat, with a nasal twang, and reminded me of a Vermont grocer we had dealt with one summer when I was a kid. He was a man who never smiled nor frowned, and what little he said was all in the same tone, whether it was, "She is a good woman," or "That man would cheat his own son," or "Eggs are 59 cents, cold as a cash register." This voice was that sort. It said to Mother Thing, "Have you finished?" "I have finished." The other witnesses will be heard. Clifford Russell. I jumped as if that grocer had caught me in the candy jar. The voice went on. "Listen carefully." Another voice started. My own. It was the account I had dictated flat on my back on Vega 5. But it wasn't all of it. It was just that which concerned worm faces. Adjectives and whole sentences had been cut as if someone had taken scissors to a tape recording. The facts were there. What I thought about them was missing. It started with ships landing in the pasture back of our house. It ended with the last worm face stumbling blindly down a hole. It wasn't long, as so much had been left out. Our hike across the moon, for example. My description of Wormface was left in, but had been trimmed so much that I could have been talking about the Venus de Milo instead of the ugliest thing in creation. My recorded voice ended, and the Yankee grocer voice said, "Were those your words?" "Huh? Yes." "Is the account correct?" "Yes, but is it correct?" "Yes." "Is it complete?" I wanted to say it certainly was not, but I was beginning to understand the system. "Yes." Patricia Wynant Weisfeld. Pee-wee's story started earlier and covered all those days when she had been in contact with worm faces while I was not. But it was not much longer, for while Pee-wee has a sharp eye and a sharper memory, she is loaded with opinions, and opinions were left out. When Pee-wee had agreed that her evidence was correct and complete, the Yankee voice said, "All witnesses have been heard, all facts known have been integrated. The three individuals may speak for themselves." I think the Wormfaces picked a spokesman, perhaps the Wormface, if he was alive and there. Their answer, as translated into English, did not have the guttural accent with which Wormface spoke English. Nevertheless, it was a Wormface speaking. That bone-chilling yet highly intelligent viciousness, as unmistakable as a punch in the teeth in every syllable. Their spokesman was so far away that I was not upset by his looks, and after the first stomach-twisting shock of that voice, I was able to listen more or less judicially. He started by denying that this court had jurisdiction over his sort. He was responsible only to his mother queen, and she only to their queen group. That's how the English came out. That defense, he claimed, was sufficient. However, if the Three Galaxies Confederation existed, which he had no reason to believe, other than that he was now being detained unlawfully before this hive full of creatures met as a kangaroo court, if it existed, it still had no jurisdiction over the only people. First, because the organization did not extend to his part of space. Second, because even if it were there, the only people had never joined, and therefore its rules, if it had rules, could not apply. And third, it was inconceivable that their queen group would associate itself with this improbable Three Galaxies, because people do not contract with animals. This defense was also sufficient. But disregarding for the sake of argument these complete and sufficient defenses, this trial was a mockery because no offense existed even under the so-called rules of the alleged Three Galaxies. They, the worm faces, had been operating in their own part of space, engaged in occupying a useful but empty planet, Earth. No possible crime could lie in colonizing land inhabited merely by animals. As for the agent of Three Galaxies, she had butted in. She had not been harmed, she had merely been kept from interfering, and had been detained only for the purpose of returning her where she belonged. He should have stopped. Any of these defenses might have stood up, especially the last one. I used to think of the human race as lords of creation, but things had happened to me since. I was not sure that this assembly would think that humans had rights compared with worm faces. Certainly the worm faces were ahead of us in many ways. When we clear jungles to make farms, do we worry if baboons were there first? But he discarded these defenses, explained that they were intellectual exercises to show how foolish the whole thing was under any rules, from any point of view, and he would now make his defense. It was an attack. And we'll find out what Wormface's attack and defense is next time.